Right, let's crack into it. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Sarah Heal. I'm the founder and chief executive of Information Leadership. Today, I want to talk about how three things are really tightly linked in today's world: artificial intelligence, privacy, and content management. There's a lot of excitement about AI. It promises productivity, insights, automation, but behind the scenes, AI is only as safe as the content it can access. And that brings privacy into sharp focus. If private, sensitive, or outdated information is sitting in the wrong place, in an inbox, in a personal OneDrive, or in an old team site, and AI tools are allowed to access it, you have a real risk. Not a future risk, a right now risk. So this session is all about foundations. It's not just about how do you write a better policy or how do you configure an AI tool, but how to structure your information in a way that makes privacy work by default. If we can do that, then AI can start to deliver on its promise without compromising trust. So just a little bit of background about information leadership. We've been serving New Zealand organisations for over 20 years, and we remain proudly Kiwi owned. What we're most interested in and most passionate about is that space where people, technology, and information intersect. So 21 years this year. So what we've found over time is success with information and with technology doesn't come from the tools alone. It comes from getting your environment right. And this framework shows 5 preconditions for digital success. The preconditions apply whether you're rolling out a new system, changing how people work, or introducing AI into your organization. If you have clear and consistent content, if your infrastructure supports the way people actually work, if users can interact with the system easily, if governance is in place, and if there is a positive predisposition from the people involved, then everything becomes easier, including privacy. When any one of these elements is missing, what you tend to get is workarounds, shadow systems, and risky behavior. And this isn't because people are careless or they're bad people, but it's because the system is not helping them make good decisions. So this is where information management really shows its value. It creates the conditions where privacy, compliance, and responsible AI use become the natural outcome, not the exception. And when something goes wrong with privacy, the first instinct is to look for someone to blame. Why did this file get shared? Why was this information still available? Why did the AI include that in a response? But when you dig a little deeper, the answer is often the same. The information was still there because no one had deleted it, or it wasn't labeled, or it was sitting in a space no one was managing. So rather than focusing only on behavior, we need to look at the systems and the habits around content. Because when we manage information well, we remove the opportunity for many of these privacy breaches to happen in the first place. And we can start to ask the questions about more training and awareness. Should we still have held on to this information? Do people have access to the information that they shouldn't? Is our information held in legacy systems or migrated to business as usual in bulk, just a lift and shift? Or did we actually need to hold the information, but should it have been electronically protected? So this is the shift we're going to make in the rest of the presentation, from a reactive mindset to one that prepares for, organizes for, and manages for good information management, good privacy, and responsible AI use. And when we think about moving to root causes and how we address these, it's proactive information governance that can help us move forward. Most organizations, even well-run ones, have messy information environments. You'll find personal information in inboxes, sensitive files in OneDrive, old drafts in Teams, and abandoned folders from systems no one uses anymore. This mess is not just inconvenient, it is risky. Because when AI tools are introduced, they don't know what is in scope and what is not. They don't understand context unless we give it to them. So if we haven't done the work to organize, protect, or retire our content, the AI may surface something old, something sensitive, or something completely inappropriate just because it was sitting there. This is where privacy risk often begins, not with a new system, but with years of unmanaged content that suddenly becomes visible. In applying proactive information governance, you dispose of content when you are legally allowed to do so in a managed way. You limit access to those areas where sensitive content is held. You migrate legacy content held in shared drives and old systems to Microsoft 365 or your modern platform of choice where it can be more securely managed. And you protect sensitive content with labels. We call this model DAMP: dispose, limit access, migrate, and protect. So let's take a look at how this works in practice. Jamie's preparing to write a report. Here are some of the challenges that he encounters. Firstly, information was returned that was out of date and no longer relevant or needed. It should have been disposed of. This is the D in DAMP. Secondly, he finds information had been shared inappropriately through OneDrive or Teams. This is the A for access in DAMP. Thirdly, some of the information that he does need is unavailable because it wasn't stored in the main system. So this is content that should have been migrated. And then finally, some of the information returned is sensitive and should have had a sensitivity label and data loss prevention applied. And so this leads to potential problems: embarrassment, privacy risk, and bad PR, among others. Not a great look. So let's take a look at how information accidents, including privacy breaches, occur and what we can do about them. On the left-hand side here are some of the root causes that can lead to private information being exposed. And so we can be thinking about what are the range of prevention activities that we can take, and also if our prevention hasn't been successful, what are our recovery actions? So here we've got some of the potential outcomes of this private information being exposed. And what we want to be thinking about inside our organizations is, how do we actually prevent this from happening? And if it does happen, how fast and effective can our recovery be? So ideally, what we want to do is be building our systems, our structures, our ways of working such that we've got those preventative gates in place. Let's take a look at each of those. So in this situation, we've got someone emailing an old report with private information to a third party. So our first gate in prevention is awareness and training. Having good change and adoption is a gate, ensuring people know what matters and ensuring people know how to do the right thing. Having managed disposal is another gate. And then final gate here is using sensitivity labels to protect personal information. Each of those gates could have been in play. So the challenge for us is not to just get one thing right, it's to have enough smart, reinforcing gates in place so that even if one is missed, the others can catch it. Change in adoption, retention and disposal, sensitivity protection. So this is where 5 tactics we're about to cover really matter. They're not silver bullets, but together what they're going to do is they're going to reduce risk significantly by closing down the most common gaps. So these are 5 underlying tactics to support privacy and safe AI use. They are not about switching on the right feature. They are about how we design our content, our environment, how we guide people's behavior, and how we reduce risk through smart defaults. The first is heightened awareness. The second is having a bias to structured workspaces. The third is having a bias to making work better. The fourth is well-managed disposal. And the fifth is helping AI to help itself. Each one is practical, achievable, and focused on making privacy easier to get right and harder to get wrong. So what we're going to do now is we're going to walk through each of these. So our first one here, heightened awareness. So awareness really is the first defense. When staff and contractors understand what private information looks like, they make better decisions about where to store and how to share it. For example, not dumping it into a Teams chat or a OneDrive folder. And they'll treat the information more responsibly, tagging, protecting, and disposing of it when it's needed. If awareness is low, people won't recognize private information in the first place. This leads to poor decisions, sharing in unsecured spaces, for example, and mishandled information, where information is exposed to AI or external users. So it's worth remembering that the root of most privacy mishaps, it's not maliciousness. It's simply people not realizing the risk. And awareness is the upstream fix that fixes and prevents your downstream problems. So let's bring this down to earth. When we talk about private information, people often imagine major data breaches or highly classified material. But the real privacy risk sits in the everyday. It shows up in the tools we all use: Teams, Outlook, OneDrive, and SharePoint. And here's what that risk actually looks like: a customer's phone number casually added into a Teams chat, an HR spreadsheet stored in someone's personal OneDrive, or a sensitive complaint hidden in a long email thread that no one has ever labeled or managed properly. And because these examples are part of our normal business as usual, they often go unnoticed. Most staff may not even be aware that they are handling private information. And that's the heart of the problem. You can't protect what you don't recognize, and this is why building awareness is so important. It's not just a job for privacy experts, it needs to be built into the habits of every staff member and contractor across all parts of the organisation. And so if you're wondering, does my organisation have an awareness issue? Start by asking a few simple questions. First, can your people confidently identify what private information looks like in their roles? Not in theory, but in the actual documents, messages, or systems they use each day. Second, do they understand the difference between general business information and content that has legal, reputational, or regulatory implications? And finally, have they been given clear real-world examples that are relevant to their work? Generic training often falls flat. What matters is giving people examples that match their own context. If the answer to any of these is no or not sure, then that's the signal to start investing in practical awareness efforts. Because without this baseline understanding, even the best policies and tools won't make a real difference. And even with the best intentions, people forget. And that's why we need to design awareness into the tools they're already using. One of the simplest ways to do this is through just-in-time prompts, like tooltips. These are those small messages that pop up when you're about to do something that might have privacy implications. For example, if someone types a personal ID number into an Outlook message or uploads a document with the word confidential in the title, a tooltip can quietly suggest they apply a sensitivity label. No training session needed, just a gentle nudge in the right moment, in the right direction. In Teams, tooltips could appear when someone shares from OneDrive instead of a team workspace, helping them to think twice about what they're doing. So it's these small, well-timed prompts that help turn awareness into action. Over time, they build habits and reduce risk without disrupting productivity. So, why does awareness matter when it comes to AI? And that's because AI tools like Copilot are only as safe as the data and the context we give them. If staff don't recognize what private information looks like, then they're not going to think twice about including it in prompts or pulling information from the wrong place. That means AI can end up surfacing or summarizing content that was never meant to be seen more widely. We have already seen examples where AI pulled sensitive content into documents, emails, or chats simply because it was left sitting in a shared workspace or tucked away in a OneDrive. When awareness is missing, AI can magnify privacy risks. But if we build that awareness in from the start and support it with good structure and labeling, then AI becomes a far more useful and much safer tool. So that was number one, heightened awareness. Moving on to number two, something I'm particularly passionate about as an information management practitioner is bias to structured workspaces. So this might look like a joke, but it's actually a pretty accurate picture of how unstructured content behaves in most organizations. You have information everywhere, scattered across personal OneDrives, inboxes, ad hoc teams, and random file shares. Trying to manage privacy in that kind of environment is like herding cats. If you can't track where the sensitive material is, you can't apply labels consistently, and AI ends up surfacing content it probably should not. So, one of the biggest risks we see is not deliberate misuse, it's the lack of structure. When content is left loose and unmanaged, then there's no reliable way to protect it. A better approach is to make it easy and actually preferable for people to use structured and well managed spaces. If we can give them tools that work better than emailing themselves files or dragging content into OneDrive, they will shift naturally. So, sure, policies and change initiatives can help, but the real game changer comes when staff see that structured workspaces actually make their work easier. And that is what leads to long-term behavior change. So when we look at this slide here, and we think about the various different information stores we have, the good, the bad, and the ugly, where people are working in structured workspaces, it's much easier for us to apply default protection labels, to override inappropriate user behavior, and to automate retention and disposal. As we move into the more ad hoc information stores, we get a lack of reliable structure, which makes it really hard to manage the content at scale until we get to the point where it's not searchable and it's hard to manage, let alone being possible for us to manage our privacy risk. So measure it for your organization, ponder, and then act. One quick way to understand your risk is to measure OneDrive usage across your organization. If you see high volumes of work being done in personal OneDrives, especially by people who deal with private or sensitive information, then that's a warning sign. OneDrive is fine for individual work, but it's not designed for long-term storage or team collaboration. And what this pattern usually shows is that your structured digital workspaces are not working hard enough for you. People are finding it easier to work in personal spaces than in shared ones. And that means that the risk of sharing mistakes, lost content, or AI surfacing private files is much higher. Here are two different organizations. For each, the green is showing content held in managed workspaces with structure and protection applied. The yellow shows ad hoc workspaces which are not being well managed, and the red shows OneDrive, which has little management across it at all. So clearly what we can see is that organization B is in much better shape. It has hardly any OneDrive use compared to organization A, and it has much more extensive managed workspace use, where access can be controlled and sensitivity labels can be applied. And so we see this pattern a lot also with ad hoc teams, where teams' workspaces get created for a short-term project or a quick conversation, and then they never get cleaned up or governed. And so over time, these ad hoc workspaces can become privacy risks. They may contain draft contracts, HR conversations, or sensitive customer information, all sitting in places with no structure or oversight. The more of these uncontrolled spaces you have, the greater the chance that something will be surfaced by AI or accidentally shared with the wrong people. So again, this isn't about blaming users. Often they create these spaces because they need to get things done quickly. But it is a signal that your structured environment is not meeting their needs. And so what we can see here is the use of ad hoc teams in organization A, this bit here, is much, much worse than the ad hoc use of teams in organization B. So again, we see organization B primarily using structured workspaces, managing access and able to apply sensitivity controls to it. In this final dashboard I want to show you, this is a person by person view. And what we can see here is that the first four people have really good habits. They're using structured workspaces, they're applying labels, and they're working in environments with proper retention settings. The four towards the bottom, showing a lot of red, hold most of their content in OneDrive or email with little to no structure. So even though the number of files is the same, the privacy risk is not. One's working in a controlled environment, the other isn't. And so in this scenario, the users whose bars are mostly green are less likely to involve the organization in a breach than the users whose bars are mostly red. And so this is where you can target your improvement efforts. Start with the people who handle the most sensitive information and have the least structure around them. That's where you're going to get the biggest gains in terms of privacy protection, safer use of AI, and a stronger overall information environment. So you might say, well, Sarah, that's all very well, biasing to structured workspaces, but that's a problem in our organization. Well, here's where number 3 comes in, biasing to making work better, making the right thing to do the easiest thing to do. So again, here's another dashboard. We've got the 2 different usage profiles, each one showing how people are working across controlled workspaces, ad hoc workspaces, and OneDrive. On the left here, OneDrive usage is very high. over 3.7 million files sitting in personal storage, while only 774,000 are in structured workspaces. So what this is telling us is that people are finding it quicker or easier to use OneDrive than to work in the shared spaces provided for collaboration. Now compare that to the right-hand example. OneDrive usage is much lower, most content's going into structured workspaces, and so that's a much safer position for privacy, information management, and AI use. So why the difference? In some cases, OneDrive actually might be easier, and yes, that can be uncomfortable to admit, particularly if you're an information management geek like me. However, other factors that we want to look at and really unpack is lack of training and lack of structured workspaces that don't meet people's needs. If structured workspaces are too slow, they're too clunky, we have to go through multiple clicks to find them, then users will work around them. And in some organizations, email remains the default way to save and share information. That nudges people back into personal storage, which then increases privacy risks. So the key message here is actually quite simple. People will always choose the path that best helps them to get their work done. If you want them to use safer, more structured options, then those options need to be just as fast, flexible, and reliable. Ideally, even better. So when tools feel clunky or slow, people are always going to find ways around them. That's human nature. We've seen this again and again, especially with structured environments that are too complex, too slow, or just not matched to the task. The more effort it takes to work the right way, the more likely people are to store sensitive information in the wrong place, or use tools like email or OneDrive just to keep things moving. And so this is why good design and usability matter just as much as governance. If the structured workspace is easier than the workaround, people will use it. Here we go. And so even with AI in the picture, the fundamentals still apply. If we want AI to behave well, we need to give it content that's structured, labeled, and properly managed. When structured workspaces are hard to use, people will avoid them. And when that happens, AI ends up pulling from places it should not, like personal OneDrives or abandoned teams or channels. So this is where design plays a critical role. We need to make sure that the tools we want people to use are actually easier than the risky workarounds. And when we combine smart privacy settings with well-designed, user-friendly workspaces, everyone benefits. People can do their jobs more easily, AI gives better results, and privacy risks go down. So let's move on to number 4, and that's having a bias to disposal. And let's be honest, most organizations are information hoarders. Not because people are careless, but because there is no clear line between what should be kept and what can safely be deleted. Now, what I've seen over the past 10 to 15 years is I've seen much more maturity coming into organizations. I've seen organizations getting better at this, but many organizations still have a real road to travel to get to where they need to be. And the consequence of this approach to hoarding information, to not doing managed disposal, is that we end up with multiple versions of documents, old reports, sensitive customer details, and draft content sitting around for years in inboxes, personal folders, and abandoned sites. The problem is not just clutter. All of that content remains searchable, shareable, and potentially visible to AI tools. So when Copilot or other AI services are given access to these locations, they don't know what's out of date, what's private, or what was never meant to be used again. And the longer you keep your unmanaged content, the greater the privacy risk. So hoarding is not a safety net, it is a liability. So deliberate, well-managed disposal reduces your exposure to AI errors, audits, or breaches. And once we recognize that hoarding creates risk, then the next step is to build disposal into how we work. This isn't something we leave until storage limits are reached or systems become unmanageable. Controlled disposal means making decisions based on approved disposal authorities. These are the rules that tell us how long to keep different types of information and when it is safe, appropriate, and lawful to delete them. It's not about deleting everything. It's about applying your attention schedule with confidence, knowing that the disposal is justified and documented. So when we have a look at what happens, we create a piece of content, we use it, we work with it, we might even move it to inactive or cold storage, and then in time, what we want to do is dispose of it according to the approved rules. So when we do this, we reduce what AI has access to by default. So this lowers our risk in audits, lowers our risk in terms of privacy investigations, and it keeps information environments cleaner and easier to manage. So disposal should be deliberate, not aggressive. And when it is based on approved disposal authorities, it becomes a key part of your organization's privacy, compliance, and operational strategy. So here's another example where what we want to see is we want to see that biased to controlled disposal. So where a lot of organizations think that keeping everything forever is the safest choice, in terms of privacy, it's actually one of the riskiest. Old files that are no longer needed are still accessible, still searchable, and still discoverable by AI tools, even if they should have been deleted years ago. So in this example here, we have organization A, no controlled disposal, more chance of old content being surfaced. Organization B, clearly on a journey, trying hard, it's on its way. And then organization C, safer with deliberate disposal for most files. So the best approach is to build a culture of well-managed disposal. Doing this well depends on structure. It's much easier to apply consistent disposal rules across well-managed content. So it's not about deleting everything. It's about making smart, risk-aware decisions that protect both your people and your organization. So sometimes disposal isn't going to be possible. Uh, you might not be able to, inside your disposal schedule, dispose of content that has some sensitive information in it. So in those cases, the goal shifts from deleting or disposing to containing. And there are three main fallback options that help reduce risk when you can't dispose. So first, you can redact or summarize. This means removing sensitive parts or creating high-level summaries that don't expose private details. Secondly, one of my personal favorites, you can restrict access. Make sure only the right people and the right systems can see the content. And that includes removing it from general AI access where possible. And then thirdly, you can label the content. Apply a sensitivity label or a not for AI use tag so that systems and users treat the content with extra care. So none of these are as strong as proper disposal, but they are far better than doing nothing. They reduce exposure and give you a level of control when disposal is off the table. So let's wrap up this segment with a real world example of how this all comes together. So we're back to our friend James. He's asking AI for help. In this case, he wants some information on a health and safety issue. And behind the scenes, several things are happening that are going to reduce the risk of a privacy breach. Firstly, deletion. Anything over 5 years old was already deleted by retention labels. Part of the well-managed, well-controlled disposal program. Information over 5 years old, deleted by retention labels. The content is gone, it cannot be surfaced. Secondly, access controls were in place. So the AI could only see what James had permission to view. That included excluding content that had not been migrated or was locked down. In the current environment, only current and relevant information had actually been migrated into a structured environment. It wasn't just lifted and shifted. And so this meant that the result was both useful and safe. And finally, sensitivity labels protected private information. If something did come up that needed to be treated as confidential, it was automatically handled that way. So you can see our DAMP acronym from the start coming into play here: disposal or deletion, access, migration, and protection. And so the AI return excludes personal information and, if needed, excludes confidential information. Our prevention gates here worked. So what does all this mean in the age of AI? Let's start with the core idea here, and that is that AI in our organizations does not decide what content it sees. We do. So this is the core concept that we have to keep in mind. If the systems feeding the AI data are messy, poorly labeled, or full of private information, then we should not be surprised when it gives risky or inappropriate answers. The best way to improve AI behavior is not to add more rules, it is to be thoughtful about what AI gets to see in the first place. And so this is the principle behind this next tactic. Help AI help itself by limiting what it can access. So the first step is to narrow the scope of content. Rather than giving AI access to every site and file, what we can do is we can restrict it to well-managed libraries that use consistent labeling and permission controls. So almost always OneDrive's emails and ad hoc teams and libraries are too risky. The risk to us in terms of the content they contain that we don't know or understand is high. In comparison, structured teams or libraries will be safe if deliberately designed. We can set them up to automatically use retention and protection labels, and we can apply filters by metadata. We can look for patterns inside documents. All of this becomes possible with these cleaner environments. So we can also block entire categories such as personal storage areas, legacy file shares, or anything that contains uncontrolled or sensitive material. It's much better to start small and safe, then expand as your governance improves. And at the bottom here, I've got just a simple example of one of the things we're working with inside our organization, which is structured or curated content. So we've got a proof of concept going inside our organization where we can ask AI questions about working here, all the policies and procedures about working here. And so this is structured and curated content that will be security and protection trimmed. And in time, I would expect that in a number of areas, particularly in areas of the intranet, that AI is going to start to replace search. So we can train AI not just on what to use, but what to avoid. By consistently labeling sensitive content, for example, with tags like private or not for AI or restricted, we can actually guide AI's behavior. These signals act like virtual guardrails. They don't guarantee privacy, but they significantly reduce the chance of accidental exposure. So, information management geeks, here we are again. Metadata is not just for filing, it is a critical part of how we train AI to act responsibly. So, in summary, help AI to help you. AI does not need constant babysitting if we build in the right defaults. Smart labeling, permission limits, structured environments, well-migrated content. If we do these things, AI is set up to support us working in a compliant way and to be respectful of privacy, even when humans are not watching closely. This is the future of responsible AI use, not just clever tech, but strong foundations that support it. I'm going to finish up with just one worked example. And so this is an example of high stakes content that all of our organizations have to manage, and how the tactics we've been discussing can help us to reduce privacy risk. So there's quite a lot that goes on in any recruitment process. Here's an example of some of the types of contents that we might be collecting or creating. Let's now see how we would handle the information from a privacy perspective based on some of the principles we've talked about already. So firstly, let's think about, for each of these steps, what steps have content that we have to pay particular attention to from a privacy perspective? The second thing to think about is who actually needs to see this information and interact with it. And in determining who needs to see it, by default, we are also determining who doesn't. So something that's a little bit tricky here is that key business staff relate to where in the organization the role is being hired. So this will change on a vacancy by vacancy basis. Some information not only needs access controls, but may also need information protection to ensure that if a document was inadvertently shared, it could not be opened. So you need to decide where in your organization this applies. And then there's the question of how long do we keep it for? And where are we putting it? And how are we avoiding the ad hoc information stores like Outlook, ad hoc Teams, OneDrive, etc.? So it's all very well, but there are some rubs here. The default for external communications is still email, and yet it's very hard to manage the risk of email. And then finding private information in email can be like looking for a needle in a haystack. So if you're using Microsoft 365, there are tools you can use to bypass email, which can reduce your risk considerably. Microsoft 365 allows folders and channels to have email addresses, so you can get the best of both there. OneDrive is worse than email, so don't use OneDrive for personal information. Strictly limit space and apply managed disposal there. And really help people to avoid just in case information stores. Here's what a structured approach can look like. First, use a well-managed library or repository with metadata and clear structure. Then you have a folder per vacancy. My information management peeps will know we're talking about case files here. This allows you to have documents for each vacancy, access permissions, protection settings, setting of retention when the recruitment process is completed. You can also show the status of the process itself, and the folder can have an email address, so files can be sent straight to it if needed. You will also need to determine how the information about successful applicants is treated, including their movement to a personnel file and then deleting the content previously held as part of the process. In summary, expect people to use structured workspaces and monitor this usage. Determine where your high stakes content is held and apply deliberate design and treatment for this. It may be too much for your organization to think about the application of sensitivity labels or access controls at scale. But to get started, You don't have to do everything to do something. And starting with your high stakes content is the right place to begin. Apply deliberate design and treatment here. And much of this content will actually be held in case files, recruitment by role, performance reviews, etc. So that was a worked example of how privacy considerations apply to a common business process and how the 5 tactics can support safety and good results. So let's sum these up now. To protect privacy, start with the information. Recognize private information in daily work. So make sure you understand where the business processes are that use private information. Use structured, shared, well-managed spaces and make that how the organization works by default. Guide people by making the right way the easy way. Pay particular attention to the design and how your systems are being used. Remove what is no longer needed safely through a managed disposal program. And finally, control what AI can see and what AI can use. So bear in mind that stronger privacy is not a separate project. It's the outcome of better information habits. If you get that right, AI is going to work with you and not against you. So I think I can take some questions potentially. I'm not quite sure how to. They might have come through in the Q&A panel. Oh, here we go. 3. What is a non-OneDrive example? So that might be in, say, Dropbox or just in a file share. Another question, wouldn't AI assess value also based on date and on words like draft? Can it be told to disregard a document with confidential in the title or file name? Absolutely, you can train the AI however you want to train the AI, but it's much simpler to keep your information in well-managed stores, to have good metadata, and to apply sensitivity and protection labels. Question here from Grant Robinson. What about the situation where we keep a CV on file for future opportunities? I think the approach there is to keep the CV on file for a limited period of time. So you might say, when someone sends you an unsolicited CV, or you have that CV, you might respond to the person and say, thank you for this. We're going to keep this on file for 12 months. And then at the end of that 12-month period, your managed disposal process runs. $1 million question from Anonymous. How does one get buy-in from leadership to prioritize these strategies? I love this question because it's a perennial one. It's been going on for sort of 20 years as we've tried to get leadership to pay attention to information management. I think the best thing to do is to take that strategy of we don't have to do everything to do something. And so the kind of areas we're seeing people target are things like personnel files, things like contract files, things like customer files. So you don't have to go everywhere to do something and to make a difference. And if you pick that high stakes content, in my experience, leadership is particularly risk averse. And so if you can play really hard into that risk, then that would be where I would go. But I'm happy to chat after the session. Just hit me up on LinkedIn and we can have a bit of a yarn about your particular situation and maybe some of the change and adoption strategies that we've done. Is Teams not safe? Is SharePoint safer to collaborate internally with staff? That's a great question, Nicola. I think what most people don't realize is that it is possible to set up your teams in a way that is well managed and where you have metadata applied and where you can actually control and manage your content. So if your organization wants to collaborate through teams, which many do, then you need to have a process for how you create teams, how you apply the right metadata to teams, how you manage the information inside the team, and then how you close out the team. So it's all about having that control and having a well-managed process. Love the approach to, where's that gone? Hang on. Love the approach to start with high-risk areas for labeling, HR, legal. Where else should we start? Yeah, so contracts is the other one. Without knowing your organization, it's hard for me to make kind of specific recommendations. But I think if you step back and you think about, well, what are the business processes that we run through this organization? What are the key business processes? That would be where I would start. And then I'd say, well, okay, as part of that process, what sensitive or personal information might we be creating or sharing or storing? Run through that, and that will give you your high stakes area that you need to hone in on. Quite a few more questions coming in here. So can AI really access anything on OneDrive or Teams? Is this just within the organization or external as well? So the great news is that if you're using Microsoft 365, there's not going to be an external AI looking at your content. So it's just held within your organization's walls. Having said that, though, the greatest risk, of course, is human risk. So if I'm in your organization and I have access to content I shouldn't, then that's where the risk comes in. So you wouldn't expect, say, Gemini or Claude to be accessing your content inside your OneDrive or your Teams. Again, I can chat more about that. So if you want me to talk to you some more about that, then just hit me up personally. Thanks, Irene. Thanks, Crystal. Rob, do I think the, where's it gone? So many questions coming through. Do I think the large number of apps and programs is exposing organizations to greater risk? 100%. 100%. I think the bigger your surface area is, right, the bigger your risk is going to be. And so that's where if we can set up well-managed ways of working, we give people the right training, we make sure that we've got obvious replacements for the weird and wonderful things they want to do. Those are kind of some of the steps we can take. And I think what's kind of interesting about this is it really does show for me how information management needs to have a seat at the table when organizations are talking about information security and information privacy. Information management, I feel, should be getting its moment in the sun here. Because unless you're really clear about the systems and tools you're using, and unless you understand where your business processes hit them, then it's hard to plug those gaps. And what we know is technology is getting smarter and smarter. There are more and more ways to expose us to risk. So I think the dawn has come for good information management. Got a few people saying thank you. What was that question there or comment there? From Matt, I wonder why we don't explicitly reference commercial sensitivity in privacy conversations. Do these have different considerations? I think it's probably because there's a Privacy Act that requires us to be thinking about and having these kind of conversations. Having said that, Matt, I think everything that applies in terms of protecting your information from a privacy perspective applies as well from a commercial sensitivity perspective too. So all of those good practices around how do people know what's commercially sensitive and what they should and shouldn't share? Are we managing our disposal of commercially sensitive information? Are we protecting it well? Are we limiting access to it? All of those considerations apply as well. What's an IPC workspace? Great question, anonymous attendee. IPC, information protection and compliance. So it's just I've talked quite a bit about managed workspaces. That's what I'm talking about there, where they've got structure, they've got metadata, and they've got appropriate labeling on them for retention and disposal and for sensitivity where they need them. Thanks, Sarah. I was at the 7th Data Conference. Information management only got mentioned once when it came to AI. Oh my gosh. I can't believe that. It's very depressing. Very, very depressing. I don't know quite what to say about that. Good to get this message in front of that crowd if you can. Anonymous, talk to me. If there are data people you want me to talk to, just let me know. Like I'm happy to do a presentation for leaders and for CIOs as well. We can run through this and do some other stuff. So just let me know. I'm more than happy to share this content and show up and see people. A few more thank yous. One of the risks for using AI would be misinformation and manipulation. 100%. 100%. I think it's going to be very easy for us to get quite blasé about AI and assume that the results that it's giving us are actually the right ones. And so I'm also quite optimistic about the place of humans still, because I think it's humans that will do the sense making on the AI output in terms of relevance, accuracy, and importance. Thanks everyone for showing up. I can see that we are at 11. Thank you all for the fabulous questions. Please reach out. I love to talk about this stuff, and I'd love to hear about what's going on for you inside your organization. Thank you.